All right, my dogs, this is going to be juicy. I have an NFP video here from Father Ripperger where he kind of goes in and out of nature versus not nature. And I'm going to try to nail it down as best I can and then clean up everything in the comment section. But we're going to have to, let's check this out and see if we can make heads or tails of this, because it's a little tricky. And I was going to make a Facebook meme about it, but I thought let's comb through it here and try to make heads or tails of it, because it's really important.
The natural law is an ordinance. That is, it's an ordering or a direction that is placed in man's nature so that God directs us to specific things or specific
Fast forward
ends.
a little bit.
And what this means is that we have inclinations and desires that are ordered towards specific things which God wants us to achieve or to want or to desire. St. Thomas says that in these inclinations there are three categories.
Three.
The first category is what he calls the category of natural inclination, by which we have conservation of our being as it is.
Right.
And what this means is that people actually have a desire to keep their bodily integrity.
Right. So he's saying, yes, number one, we naturally don't want to cut our fingers off. We want to preserve ourselves.
Not to die in
That's
things
what he's
of
talking
this sort.
about.
Natural inclination towards that.
Natural.
But this also means that in this particular category of natural inclination, that there are certain things prohibited, because the natural law, that is, when God directs us towards something, manifests God's will. And being a law, if we violate it, it's sinful. So, for example, part of the conservation of one's being is, if we were to go around cutting off our limbs,
it's natural to want to keep your fingers and to not off yourself.
Well, that's
mutilate
sinful,
yourself.
and it's
That's
disorder.
natural.
So any form of mutilation is contrary to this category of natural inclination. The second
Number two
category of natural inclination is that which we have in common with other animals.
Animals.
And so St. Thomas says that to eat and to reproduce are things that are proper to us as animals. Even though we're rational animals, nevertheless, we are animals. And so God gives us an inclination towards eating and towards reproduction.
That's natural. Yes, thank you.
The third category of natural inclination is that which is proper to us as human beings.
Use your head.
That is the life of reason.
Yep.
And part of this natural inclination is to live in society. So we have a natural inclination. We actually are inclined to live in common with other people. There is the pursuit of truth. So it's proper to human beings to pursue truth.
That's
and also
right.
it's proper to human beings to pursue knowledge about God. And God inclines us to do this, so that if we don't fulfill these natural inclinations, that is the ones that we must fulfill, then in point of fact we suffer a certain unhappiness. Now, contraception
Here we go.
is against every category of natural inclination.
He's right.
It's against the conservation of being, since in every form of contraception, except for one, there is...
And every form of contraception except for one mutilates the body. And he's talking about condoms. Condoms do not mutilate.
Is
obviously
a modification of the faculties, that is, the structure of our being and the function that it has. In order to achieve this, we either do it chemically by, for example, taking the pill, or by mutilation, as in sterilization.
Yep.
And so it's against the first category of natural inclination to mutilate ourselves in order to be able to engage in the conjugal act without having children. The second category of natural inclination is also violated by contraception, because it is against the finality of reproduction.
Right. And he goes on to say in another video, he goes, we know this because animals don't go around contracepting. It's not natural. Animals don't get, I guess tattoos are a dumb example. Listen, it's natural to want to reproduce, not to try to contracept. It's also natural to not want to use to use any type of family planning. That's not natural, okay? It violates what St. Thomas Aquinas says is the second law of natural inclination, which is to reproduce. Contraception violates it. NFP violates it. Okay, basically, Father Ripperger, he's a house divided, because he's saying contraception is wrong and NFP is right. But you can't say that with a straight face and make any sense. So he flip-flops back and forth with words like element and unity. And this is how he's able to weave his way through the confusion and get out the other side. And no one knows what happened. It's just a bunch of words without definition that aren't used right in some ways. And it sounds nice. And he's Father Ripperger, so what do we know? But that's why I want to do this video, to slow it down and to hit pause. And we're going to try to, like I said, get to the bottom of it. It's not super long, but here we go.
Paul VI tells us, basing it on the teaching of St. Thomas in the Summa, that there are two ends to the conjugal act.
There are not two ends to the conjugal act. It's not in the Summa. The St. Thomas Aquinas never said there are two ends to the conjugal act. There's only one, and that's procreation. Natural ends, that is. Okay? The reason they're saying this stuff is because they're trying to fit NFP into licity, which means they have to create a new purpose, aka unity, which is also love, which is good of the spouses, which is charity and all that stuff, as in consent every time, no more marital debt. They don't come out and say that, but that's what's going on here. Let's listen.
Union and procreation. And so if we violate either one of these, then we go contrary to God's intention when we
Violating unity and procreation. There's only, he said there were two ends, unity and procreation. Like I said, wrong. Sorry, there's only one end. So you can't violate unity. Or it doesn't matter if you do as far as licity goes, because it's not essential.
look at the structure of the generative faculty, we see that it's ordered towards union and procreation.
When we look at the structure of the generative faculty, we see that it's ordered toward unity and procreation. No, it's not ordered toward unity. It's ordered toward procreation, essentially. Non-essentially, it could be ordered toward all sorts of things, okay? If you want to call that unity, non-essential, but essentially it's ordered toward procreation alone. Unless you're trying to get NFP licit. And if that's what you're trying to do, then you have to come up with a second purpose, aka unity, which is a catch-all for everything, even though he's not admitting that.
And so any action contrary to that is sinful. The church tells us it's gravely sinful. But the church also teaches us that the union and the procreation can't be separated either.
The church tells us that the union and the procreation can't be separated. Okay, so we have to define what union is, but it's never defined. And Timothy Gordon can't define it either. Won't define it. Okay, and I've talked to Father Ripperger in person. He says union just means the nature of the act. Okay, so that's not, the nature of the act is not an end or a purpose. So he's calling it an end and a purpose in this video, even though it's not, which is super confusing. Procreation alone is essential, which means it can be separated from the non-essential. But Father Ripperger here is saying, the church is saying the unitive element can't be separated. If unity is nature, then you have to have the conjugal act integral. But if unity is secondary and it is separate.
So that's why, for example, the church forbids things like artificial insemination.
Yes.
And in vitro fertilization.
Now he's flip-flopping again, back from unity as an end to unity as the essence of the nature of the act. So that's why you can't have IVF, because you are separating procreation from the nature of the act. It has nothing to do with unity. It's the nature of the act. You have to uphold the intrinsic nature, which is the way babies are made. You can't make it in a test tube licitly. Okay, here, let's.
In which the procreative element is.
So my point is that he gets some things right, and then he gets some things crazy because he's using unity as love, and he's using unity as intrinsic nature of the act. But he flip-flops back and forth, and you never know it. And I don't know if he knows it. He's just trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and he's doing his best he can. Here we go.
Separated from the unitive element. There are some Catholics who mistakenly believe that because the church is pro-family and pro-children, that somehow that means that any means whatsoever is okay to attain having children, and that's not true. The church doesn't allow us to do that, precisely because she does not want us to violate the will of God and ultimately for us to lose our souls as a result of it.
Oh, shoot. Now
I encourage everyone to support the Adams Project in Leesburg.
Recently, there has been a kind of a supplanting in a very subtle way, in which most people would be completely unaware of this two-end theory,
Okay, so this is where he kind of gets it right. He's like, look, we got Christopher West barging in here saying this has got to be a love thing or it's not licit. And this is where Father Ripperger correctly, I'll just let him explain. He gets it right here. And then he goes back into calling unity an end, which it's not. But right here, he gets this
One
part right.
is that some people say that the two ends of the conjugal act are union and procreation, or not union and procreation, but procreation and mutual love of the spouses. This is false. That is not the two primary ends.
Listen to what he just said. Two primary ends. That's like saying the two first place finishers of the Boston Marathon. You can't have two primary ends unless you have two natures like Bruce Jenner, okay? One primary end. This is the source of all the crazy with the annulments and the gender bending, is when you have two natures to the conjugal act. Two natures, two primary ends. NFP is the tip of the sword causing divorce, annulment, gender bending, and everything that follows that.
Of the conjugal act are not procreation and mutual love, but procreation and union.
All right. Like I said, the two primary ends of the conjugal act are not procreation and love. This is what Christopher West said. This is what your bishop says. They all say this. The two primary ends are procreation and love. Totally wrong. Father Ripperger is right about this. But then he says the two primary ends are procreation and union. Baloney. One primary end. Union is not an end. Anything that's primary is essential. So again, he means the intrinsic nature of the act, but he's saying don't be like Christopher West, but he's setting the stage for Christopher West anyway by saying marriage has two primary ends.
And the point being is that even if you hate your spouse, you still have an obligation to render the marital debt to your spouse if they ask.
See, yeah, okay, good. He just, anyway.
And provided that union and procreation, that is, you're open to the procreative element, you fulfill your obligations in the marital debt. But if you
Procreation, by the way, isn't an element. I'm sorry to be so picky and jump in and out. There's just a lot here, and we got to hammer it down. It's important.
to retranslate that or change that into saying that it's mutual love, then if you don't love your spouse, it's somehow or another, it's immoral. Well, obviously, hating your spouse is immoral. And St. Paul tells husbands that they have to work on loving their spouses. But mutual love is a secondary and non essential, although important, end of the conjugal act.
Perfect, beautiful sentence. Love it. Exactly right. Mutual love is a secondary, non essential purpose of the conjugal act. Exactly. Yes. The problem is you can't have NFP if you say that, because you need something else other than procreation, or what the heck are you NFPing about? Okay. So he's saying 6 is wrong, but half a dozen of another is right.
We have to be very careful about this. Because what happens is it becomes romanticized, and people somehow think of the idea that if the conjugal act is going to be romanticized, then somehow or another we shouldn't engage in it. It doesn't work that way. The third category of natural inclination, which is violated by contraception,
You got to use your
is
head.
that it's contrary to life as human beings that are properly human beings. That is, it's contrary to the life of reason.
I know. This is why all non-Catholics know that NFP is Catholic contraception, because it's pretty frickin' obvious. But Catholics are, for political reasons, warped on it, and they have got to put this square peg in the round hole, because if they don't, they can't be it's so ingrained. And once you start playing with the conjugal act and giving certain things license, you can't put that fire back in the fireplace. And this is why we are we're trying to we're playing all these word games with the obvious.
And it is this way in a number of ways. It is against living in society insofar as contraception affects the common good by reducing the number of citizens which contribute to the society. People have this idea that whatever they do
NFP
in their
reduces
bedroom
you.
has nothing to do with anyone else's business. It's false. The government of any country has a right to forbid its citizens to use contraception because it directly impacts the common good of the society. And also the church also has that right, obviously, to tell them what they can and cannot do.
Yep.
It is also against the pursuit of truth, since one has to deny reality in order to pursue contraception.
Deny reality, which the denying reality that contraception denies is that the conjugal act is not made for procreation. That's the reality that you're denying. But NFP says the same thing. Oh no, what are we going to do? Let's find out.
Is that the generative faculty is structured in a specific way, and when people
the generative faculty is structured in a specific way. It's not only structured in a specific way, that is the purpose.
engage in contraception, it's a denial of truth. It's a denial of the structure of human beings as they are.
Contraception is not necessarily a denial of the structure of human beings as the way they are. I mean, yes, it is, but it's a denial of the purpose of the act. That's the key thing. But you can't say that if you're pro NFP, because NFP violates the purpose of the act. So this is why we have to do some serious gymnastics. Listen up.
The church permits the use of natural family planning, sometimes called NFP. And NFP is different from contraception insofar as not as to the end.
NFP is different from contraception, not as to the end. He's saying what Humanae Vitae says. NFP and contraception have the same end. Sounds great. What's the problem? Then why don't we contracept if they both have the same end? And like I said, if it's not mutilating anything like condom, what's the problem? If a condom is equally as effective as NFP and no mutilation occurs, why would we say condoms are immoral? Why? There's obviously no reason. If you say NFP is fine and it's 90% effective or 98 or whatever, and condoms are not fine and they don't mutilate and they're both, and it's the same effect anyway, duh.
The church recently condemned a theological position which says that the reason contraception is immoral is because it's contra life.
Listen to his voice. I don't even think he can choke out the words because he's totally wrong. The church says the reason contraception is immoral is because it's contra life, and that's not the reason. That's what he just said, and that's what he says. The church says that. No, the church said back in the 1800s that anything that impedes conception is immoral. Not anything that impedes unity, whatever that is immoral. You cannot impede conception. That's the key. And so the human element there in the Vatican II situation has said contraception is not immoral because it impedes conception. That's exactly what he just said. And the reason they say this is just because of NFP. No, the church cannot contradict herself, but you can get erroneous opinions out of Rome these days. Just like Cardinal Coco Palmerio said that you don't need the bishop's permission to divorce. That's just completely groundless. There's no basis in fact for him to say anything like that, but he did. Okay, because he answered a bishop. Sorry, let's go. Let's listen.
The church said, no, that's not why it's immoral. It's immoral because it uses an illicit means. That is, contraception separates the unitive and the procreative element.
There he goes again. Contraception separates the unitive and the procreative element. Procreation is not an element, it's a purpose. So if you are calling it an element, then you're saying that unity is a purpose too. And unity is not a purpose. You have the nature of the act, like I said. Unity is a weasel word designed to let Christopher West into the room and saying love is essential. And if love is essential, then love is primary, which means procreation is not primary. obviously, because contraception isn't apparently not immoral because it gets rid of the baby. Anyway.
Because you can licitly use NFP, provided circumstances are appropriate, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can use NFP in order to avoid becoming pregnant. And provided you have right intention, it's completely morally licit because the means, that is the NFP, to achieve of not having children is a morally licit thing, provided circumstances, again, are proper. So as a result, because NFP doesn't separate the unitive and the procreative elements, and because it doesn't necessarily violate the three categories of natural inclination, then the church says that it's morally permissible.
Okay, he just said, because it doesn't violate the three categories of natural inclination, the church says it's permissible. NFP violates two of the three natural inclinations because we are naturally inclined to reproduce. Scratch that with NFP and contraception, and we're naturally inclined to use our minds for truth. And to say that avoiding pregnancy is pursuing pregnancy is just, that's how stupid it is. But people are doing it. It's amazing. But that's all it is. Okay, so this is why any proclamation from the Vatican is wrong that says NFP is fine, because it does violate nature, and there is no infallible NFP statement. There's just statements. So they're wrong on this one.
To use NFP in order to avoid pregnancy, however, Pius XII makes it very clear that you must have a grave reason. And by
so this is how they kind of get all this grave reason stuff. If it's natural, you don't need a reason. Donkeys, hyenas, and cheetahs don't need a reason. It's just nature, right? And if it's not natural, no reason will suffice, which I've said in other videos. This is why Pius XI in Casti Connubii says, no reason, however grave, will justify doing anything that's against nature. Okay, super simple. So all this gray area stuff, this grave reason, this good reason thing, it's just floodgates open. I got a good reason. Then you don't need a reason because it's natural and it's good. And unity is essential. You got to have unity, right? So whatever that means, Christopher West will tell you what unity means in a super emotional way. You know, here.
By grave, we mean dire. It's not something slight.
Let's
and by
keep,
this,
let's
we might
keep
mean
NFP
grave, we mean
safe, legal, and
starvation
rare.
of either the couple or the kids that they're taking care of, a loss of a home. If you take on one more kid, you may have to end up putting more, taking out
here,
a loan against your house to pay for. These are quite expensive these days. Or things like this. It may end up, if it's sufficiently grave, then you can use it. But if it's not, then you cannot use NFP, except under one circumstance, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you cannot use NFP in order to avoid pregnancy without a sufficient reason. This means that things like you don't want to take on the extra financial burden, or you want to space your kids out every 2 years. That's not a good enough reason, and it's gravely sinful to do so. It is a moral sin to use NFP without sufficient reason, even though the method is good in itself.
I think we've
got. You can, however, use NFP in order to get pregnant. So what that means is,
by the way, yes, you can use NFP to get pregnant. I still think you're better off just letting God do the planning instead of helping God out. You know, providence cannot be improved upon, and he knows how many kids to have and when to have them and who's going to be where, and you cannot improve on it, obviously. So I say just ditch the planning. That's God's department. You do you. Let God do. Let God handle that part. Doggone.
The church has always allowed the use of NFP, which is one of its principal ends or functions, so that the person can know when their period of fertility are, so that they can actually become pregnant. The church has always permitted that.
I think we're
the teaching of NFP, however, has become a bit problematic.
Yeah,
this is late.
All right, so then he just goes into like all the crazy NFP classes and stuff. So that's it. The final thing here, our problem is that the conjugal act has one primary purpose that's natural, and that's essential, and that's procreation. And that's natural because that's what animals do. And you can't change nature. So I'm going to sign off here. I think that's it. I like Father Ripperger a lot. He's the man and all that, but he's mainstream on this, and so he's got to jump around with this unity thing to try to. I wish I'd come up with a better analogy, but basically he's not defined his terms, and that's why he can skirt around this, and I thought I'd nail it down. Oh, it's been super fun. Now, as I always say, the difference between me and everybody else on YouTube is I don't run away from any comments, and I want to talk about everything. So whatever you got to say, whatever you got to explain, I'll stick with you for 712 comments, no problem. Nighty night. God bless.